Welcome to the Practical Enneagram. One of the reasons I believe it took me a while to land on my correct type was because of an over-reliance on the prevalent Enneagram type descriptions. This is obviously a real problem and happens a lot. What you learn if you start looking at the Enneagram with integral theory. I'm not a big integral geek, but my coaching methodology is grounded in the integral method, and I have been studying integral theory for the last few years. What happens when you pair integral with Enneagram is that the types really come alive. We look different as our perspectives mature. It's obvious our behaviour changes, but the type descriptions out there only really capture one developmental level. Dr Khaled ElSherbini, the founder and chairman of Enneagram Egypt, has done a lot of beautiful work in synthesizing integral with the Enneagram. What that means for us as coaches and people who are active in our personal development, it helps to evoke transformation, spiritual transformation, awakening. If you're coaching with it, it helps you to help your clients more effectively, to really look at them in a three-dimensional way, to figure out whether the challenges at its origins is due to type or aspects of development that haven't been attended to. There's not a ton of practical tips in this interview, but it is worth, I think, listening to Khaled describe how he created the methodology. And as usual, you'll find all of the links to everything in the episode show notes. I hope that you enjoy. Dr. ElSherbini, thank you again for being up for this.
Thank you, Rez. Lovely to be here.
So I am currently in one of your training programs, the Integral Enneagram. Would you like to say a little bit about what the program is and where it sits within your work, and also what else you get up to in the world?
So I'm originally a professor of engineering. I had a very different career my whole life. I was teaching in universities. I was a corporate professional. But then over the last decade or so, I started realizing a few tools that were, let's say, touching my heart, making me feel closer to myself. Mm-hmm. Initially, they were just like a hobby. And it wasn't really until I realized the Enneagram that a whole huge shift happened in my psyche. And so this is really something that I need to study. And although it was introduced as a personality model when I first heard about it, I immediately realized the psychological and spiritual connotations and backgrounds that are found within the Enneagram. And I spent quite a while, like a couple of years, totally immersing into the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. And realizing its connection with many mystic and spiritual models I had heard about before. At the same time, I got to know the spiral dynamics and then Wilber's integral model. Mm. Wilber's model really put it all together for me. The structure stages, the ego development, the worldviews, how they grow up from on one hand, and the waking up path, the path of realizing truth in whatever structure you will be. Mm. So understanding this, I started wondering, how would the Enneagram types look like as they develop and mature in both the cognitive direction and the spiritual direction? Mm. And eventually that led me to the models that this program that you're going through now. It was 3 levels, 3 models. Mm-hmm. So the first one is I call it stages of the mind. Mm-hmm. And it shows the growth of the Enneagram type through the structure stages, what Wilber would say growing up. So it's a more personalized journey of growing up. Now, when the developmental models in general, Wilber, spiral dynamics, Keegan, all the other models, when they start Cook-Reuter, when they talk about it as a person in general, in all facets of their life. Let's break that down into 9 different personalities. So we see how each of the 9 types grows through the structure stages. I'm trying to simplify this, not to be too complex for the audience, if they're not aware of the growing up or the spiral dynamics. Yeah. So if we look at the evolution of the human mind, how we see the world, we can see that we have, in general, pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional ways of looking at the world. Pre-modern, modern, and post-modern, and then post-postmodern, what we can call integral. Stages of the mind is how the 9 different types move these different stages. The second model was the stages of the heart. And that is what the mystics of all traditions and religions and schools of philosophy have been looking at their whole life. So most of the spiritual schools worldwide have actually worked within one specific structure stage, which is what we call the conventional. And that's why most of them walk almost on the same level of mind. And they describe the journey of maturity of the heart, opening up of the heart, of the light running and filling the heart of peace, even reaching unity and non-duality with the divine or with the source or with the one or with nature, whatever you believe in. So this spiritual journey is called the stages of the heart. And that can give us, you can imagine it like a three-dimensional model. The Enneagram with the structure stages gives us the stages of the mind, and the Enneagram with the state stages or the heart stages gives us stages of the heart. And then in the third level of the journey, I put this all together in what I call the dimensions of consciousness, where the seeker, after taking these two models, gets to realize where everything fits with each other. And I introduced the rest of Wilber's model and also connected to the Enneagram. So you can say that this integral Enneagram journey or program is a marriage or a synthesis of the Enneagram with Wilber's integral model.
Thank you.
That's where we are today. I'm teaching the Enneagram journey for 8 journeys now, and I'm in the third journey. Journey is the full program. The third journey of the integral Enneagram right now. And the integral especially is a continuous work in progress. So with every new journey and with every new group of students, we just finished, we had about 70 students with us in the stages of the mind. So you can imagine when you get feedback from 70 students who have studied a lot of Enneagram and they know their type very well. And then you start introducing them to the structure stages, the development stages, and then they start to reflect on their life. They can usually reflect up to the structure where they have reached. So it becomes a bit of making them realize what structure they're standing at, what rung they're standing at, then start to see how their life has progressed from children, teens, to young adults, to where they are today, wherever they are.
It's a really beautiful program and beautiful process to look back and attempt to see yourself through the structural changes. Ali, where did you get the sort of detailed characteristics for how each type looks at each stage?
I mean, again, as an academic, I always create a methodology to build my models or my programs on. And I had, again, from the spirit of the Enneagram, like a 9-process methodology that I looked at into these stages. So first of all, the good knowledge of the 2 models that we're integrating, worldviews or the spiral levels, I mean, all these, I use them all. I don't, as I always say, I'm not faithful to one of them. I'm faithful to the developmental of the human. So knowing developmental process well and knowing the Enneagram well is essential, but not enough. Because once the state with the Enneagram type integrate and merge, something emerges. You're familiar with the Enneagram, so you know the subtypes. So when we talk about the self-preservation 4 and the sexual 4 and the social 4, you understand that it's not just putting the sexual instinct with the type 4 and then you just put this on top of this. No, you have to realize the emergent characteristics. And to realize these emergent characteristics, we have several tools. The first is to try to find a group of people, a society that still exists mostly at that level of consciousness.
Makes sense.
That most of the Enneagram books are written from the blue, a bit of orange, because most of the early teachers were blue, or what Wilber calls amber. Very confusing which colors to use. Sometimes I use the spiral color, sometimes I use Wilber's. And that's how you see it very well described. That's why we didn't have much problems in these stages. But then when you go to the red and the purple, and the most difficult was the beige, then you have to find new ways. So for the purple, for example, I had the privilege that we have in Egypt lots of Bedouin tribes in the desert that are still very much in the purple. Of course, once civilization has touched them, you have to realize they're not pure purple anymore. But they're very purplish in their traditions, in their life, and how you see that every one of them has a role, and there's no much differentiation from the tribe. When you sit with them, they always tell you the stories of the tribe, the history of the tribe, our elders. And it took me, I've known them for a while, and then suddenly, wow, now I understand what it means that there's not much differentiation of the ego structure from the tribe yet. There is no yet a full independent ego, which is very different than the red.
Yeah.
Moving to the red, we have lots of villages in what we call Lower Egypt. By the way, in Egypt, it's a bit confusing. So we have Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is south. Lower Egypt is the north.
Really?
As a child, it always used to confuse me. So, and it's because the Nile runs from Upper Egypt in the south all the way down to Lower Egypt in the north. That's why it's called like that. So we have many villages in Lower Egypt which have developed from purple to red. They're more now. I remember as a child going to my father and mother's villages in northern Egypt. I used to feel so much peace in my father's village, while I used to feel a bit tense, as if I have to be a bit defensive in my mother's village. And I was always amused at how my mother used to make fun of my father's village, because to her, my father's village was a bit like a bit primitive, but her village or town, actually, she used to always be proud how it's a town, not a village, and it's more developed. But to me, I didn't understand. Okay, so it's more developed, but I'm not comfortable there. I'm more comfortable with the others. When I studied levels of development, I understood this difference between magenta and red, or purple and red. So we have lots of red societies right now also. And I also have the privilege of having lots of relatives and people close there that I sit and I can actually get reflections of how life looks like firsthand, not from books, and how the people manifest in these stages. So I can say that was one of my first support systems in realizing how I can look at the types at the different stages. And then I have the privilege of having hundreds of students of the Enneagram over the last few years. And by teaching them the spiral and then Wilber's model, deep transformational process. And then I take several months describing the levels of development as the program that you have taken. By the end of it, the students are so experienced and they can start reflecting on their own life and seeing how they looked at life in different stages. And we have to look back at the childhood, how they were as little children in their families, how they were as a bit older. And sometimes it's gold when we have a mother and daughter in the class. We let the daughter reflect on herself, and then we let the mother tell us how she saw her daughter. Then you get even more nuances. Of course, the Enneagram world definitely was not blind to these developmental models. So we have several developmental models in the Enneagram world. So the Hudson in the Enneagram and in personality types, where they presented the levels of development. And the levels of development actually fits more into the stages of the heart. It's like part of this process of the stages of the heart. And then you have, of course, work on the process Enneagram, which also goes towards the stage of the heart. So the only developmental model that is close to the stages of the mind was Deborah Uten and Beth O'Hara's work. So they did some very pioneering work in the first decade of the century. In 2005, I think they presented a session in the IEA conference. They had a paper out in the Enneagram Journal in 2010, and they were strictly confined within the spiral dynamics model.
Right, yeah.
They did great work there, but that was exactly their scope, which is part of the scope that we are looking in. So also the work of Deborah, and I did study with Deborah for a while, and she did some excellent work. Yeah.
Her descriptions didn't quite capture my experience of moving through those structures.
Because as Wilber says, the spiral looks specifically at values,
right,
while most of the descriptions are looking at behaviors. So it might be a bit narrow. And that's why, as I said, I had to expand that scope tremendously by looking into many, many models. I mean, now if we get a chance to look at the different stages, I'll tell you how each level I had to get from a different place. So purple, by far, I had to get from the Bedouin tribes and the little villages in Egypt. No description could help there. You had to really see it firsthand. And I can't imagine that anyone else had a chance to go deep with purple tribes like that. And the beige was the hardest level by far. And that I had to take not from the Enneagram world at all. That I had to go to child psychology. The very early infants will show. Vivian Dittmar, when she looks at prime emotions, and then the work on very initial 6 months of infanthood. And actually it led me to a realization how we always see in the Enneagram world that we have all the types within us, but we're fixated on one of them. It's more evident with the little children. So when we talk about shock, about fear, about disgust, about the sense of separation and being alone, about competition, about joy and laughing, about needing to feel autonomous and not weak, about getting along with the others. So you realize the very early seeds of the Enneagram types in these basic affects, in these basic reactive, instinctual reactive senses that these very early infants have. We've seen in the course, we even show these facial reactions of these very early children. And we can see how this moves on to the purple role. So this becomes the defense mechanism, the most important affect that they focus on. And by focusing on it, it becomes the defense mechanism that they create a role for themselves in the tribe or in the family today, and how they can survive in the family by playing a role. And then in red, something really interesting came up. This was fascinating. Through teaching, it showed up. The independent ego, a sense of a separate self. It's like me against the world. This doesn't really show up until red. With the showing up of the red, that the passions and fixations that we talk about in the Enneagram world really have space to manifest. We cannot really look at passions and fixations before red. The child doesn't have that capacity for that yet. The child is still investigating. It's in red that the child can say, I. The child exists. And if you look at that on a mythological level, this is the main finding I realized, is that let's say it in a way not to offend anyone, the mythological Adam in the Holy Scriptures, from my understanding through these different models, is actually the movement of humanity into red. Adam being a one person or representing the entire species, that is up for debate. But in both cases, it is this entrance of humanity into red. And it's somehow suddenly everything clicked into place when I realized this. When we talk about Adam and you listen about his stories, I was always saying he could be no way more than 8 to 10,000 years old. And can't be any older than that. When we talk about Abel and
Cain and Abel,
Cain and Abel, We're talking about Cain and Abel. Okay, one of them was in agriculture, one of them is in farming. Come on, we're talking about something in the recent history. It's not something in the past. This is something very recent. When you realize that if Adam represents humanity entering red, which is what we talk about what happened in the last 10,000 years, it fits together. And then you realize, yes, this is about it. Adam is about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. And this is humanity realizing its passions and fixations and separation from oneness with nature and oneness with God. The fall of Adam from the Garden of Eden.
It's so fascinating and so rich. And I could listen to you talk about this all day. And I want to get to the more practical.
The remainder of quickly to the rest of the methodology. So we also had to consider the high side and the low side, because what I realized is we tend to negatively judge the lower levels and too positive judge the higher levels. So when we talk about red, it's always too fierce and too brutal. And when we talk about purple, they're so retarded. And when we talk about yellow and turquoise, wow, those are so spiritual. But this has nothing to do with spirituality. This is a model of cognitive growth, of worldview growth. In every one of these stages, you can be very good and very bad. That is a stage of heart. That is not a stage of mind. So in red, you can be a hero or you can be a villain. In blue, you can be a mystic or you can be a terrorist. In orange, you can be a pioneer and a creator and an innovator, or you could be a con artist, and you can be a swindler. So it is not a spiritual model. It is a cognitive model. It is an intellectual model. It is a worldview model. That was very important to realize, that we don't judge the stages, how to find the high side and the low side of each. So after we discussed this with the students, how we can identify what is personal experience for the student and what really represents their experience on any type stage. I call them a type stage. And then a methodology is finding famous examples of people we all know that might represent a type at a stage. Now that is very, very tricky because we neither know the person's type nor do we know the stage. So it's actually, when we talk about someone, we always remind, we do not know the human being, the person. We are talking about our understanding and reflection of that person. None of us has known Gandhi in person to know what type he was or what stage he was. We don't know him, but he seems very much, from the descriptions, a one-ish green, for example. So I would put his picture as a one-ish green. That doesn't mean that Gandhi was a one-ish green, but this is the stereotype, the image that had been shown to us. Tom Cruise as a three-ish orange.
That one really makes sense. I don't see how anyone can dispute that one.
But again, we don't know Tom Cruise. We don't know what his type is. True. We don't know what his stage is. But the image we have of Tom Cruise is very three-ish orange. So we also had to, as much as possible, find famous people that can represent an image. But the trick is there that then students can reflect, okay, but I'm not a famous celebrity. How can I know that I'm an orange? How would it look like in a normal human being? When you talk about Jack Welch as an 8-ish orange, well, not every one of us not every 8 in orange is a CEO of a big company. How would he look like if he was a mechanic? How would he look like if he was a professor? So this becomes the dilemma in this area, giving stereotypes and then breaking the stereotypes. And this is what I call the base methodology here. I call it the methodology, so that we can have base methodology, objective methodology.
Can you speak to the pitfalls of using the Enneagram without spiral or spiral without the Enneagram in coaching and developmental coaching?
The spiral or the developmental models in general, or Wilber's structure stages, and the Enneagram, each one of them is a profound model. Each one of them changes the way you see the world. Like, it puts you in a different place. You realize you've been living your whole world in a bubble. Through the developmental structure stages, you get to realize how all the wars that have happened in history are mostly coming from these structure stage misunderstandings and relationship problems, and so many things are from not knowing the structure stages. On the other side, the Enneagram lets you understand yourself and know the other people, know humanity, and even know divinity in a totally different light. They're both incredible. I don't want to say magical, but incredible models. But putting them together gave so much depth. Now you understand the Enneagram types and the structures much, much better. Like giving a very detailed, fine-tuned map of the human being.
I suppose I was asking you that question because when you use the Enneagram without structural map as well, it can be easy to make typing mistakes.
It's not just typing. One of the things that I used to realize a lot when I first started teaching the Enneagram, I was initially relying on all the teachings that I've had and the books I've read and the courses I've taken. 2 years, I was totally immersed. Then when I started teaching, many of my students wouldn't identify their type. And initially I thought that in this culture, in my Middle Eastern culture, how the types would look like. But then I started realizing, no, it's also a structural thing. If a 4 is in orange or 2, for example, in orange and green, the 4 doesn't look anything like the 4 that's described commonly in the Enneagram books. Melancholic, sad, moody, depressed 4 that is by themselves, likes to be alone and doesn't like anyone. It's like such a negative stereotype. It's like, I mean, 4s used to hate me when I used to talk about this, and it didn't resonate with them. But at the same time, I knew many 4s who were like that.
Yeah.
Where is the switch? And I realized, yes, most of my students are already orange and green. Orange and green, 4 doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
Even in red and amber, or in red and purple, a 4 doesn't look like that. A 4 only looks like that in blue.
In blue, yeah, which you say is hell for 4.
Which is, yes, exactly. It's a hell for a 4, and the 4 feels totally misunderstood, and there's a conflict between what they're supposed to be and what they know they are. And this is where they're very melancholic 4.
So can you speak to the relativity of the Enneagram to the spiral when it comes to what a person is actually expressing?
Okay, so the structural levels of development, the spiral and structure stages, they are more of how we think about what we think about. Now, what we think about is the content. Yeah. How we think about is this structural process, this intellectual process, this worldview process. You as a 4, you have your defensive mechanism, the way you see the world, because you have a task. Why are you here on Earth? You are here to make humans comfortable with their emotions, seeing beauty, seeing how things can always be better. Myself as a 5, why am I here? I'm here to bring transparency, to bring clarity, to connect things together. So we have a why, and our why is represented by our type, coming from our divine mission, I would say, the names, the light that we represent on Earth, which, when the ego takes over, turns into a defensive strategy. Now, that defensive strategy from one side, or main task on Earth on the other side, this is why I'm here. And this will not change. It will be the same. I will be a 5 regardless. I'm in purple, or I'm in blue, or I'm in yellow, or I'm in turquoise. I'm still a 5. I will still have my why. How I think about what I think about, and why I think about what I think about. Stages of the mind, the integration of the why and the how.
And the how. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Another insight that I really got with you and that I appreciate is that the Enneagram types have different experiences of being at certain stages. So it can be more or less pleasant. As we said before, you helped me to see that being in blue as a 4 is not so pleasant. And the other example that I loved is how green is maybe a bit too nice for Enneagram 9s. So a question in my mind arose about how to support clients or ourselves, but who are a bit too comfortable at their stage. Is a part of the role of a coach to create some friction in that situation? Let's say for the green 9 who is comfortable.
Okay, so good example is a green 9. It's a very good example of a place where the 9 can really numb out. The 9 in general has a tendency to merge. And if they merge into their greenness, and everything becomes beautiful and everything becomes nice, why come out? That causes the 9 to lose connection to themselves totally. I mean, in general, they're lost to themselves. But now it's like they are positively losing connection with themselves. I don't get angry. I am so much in peace. But you've lost yourself, and you can actually harm those around you, especially if you're in a role where you can be a teacher or you can be a model. A lot of the, what I call false gurus, happens in this 9 green stage. Yeah. Important for the coach or the mentor or the friend to at least bring awareness to the green 9. To let them focus the light on the problems in the structure without pushing. As a coach or a mentor, you do not push. All you can do is bring awareness, continuously bring awareness to the structure, give examples, give models, shed the light very strongly on the area, and allow a person to discover it on themselves. So you cannot push development. The heart growth, the spiritual growth, the psychological growth can be much faster, but the structural growth takes years. It takes a whole rewiring of the neurobiological system. Yeah, it's good to get that reminder, actually. When we do the structure stage assessments, the spiral dynamics assessments, or in the interview and we talk, we start realizing where the problems are. Usually problems can arrest, can stop the development, can cause lots of problems in a different stage. By the way, this is one of the things that we have to take care of when we're describing the type at a stage, that we have to describe it pure of these allergies and addictions. It's very important to go back and heal these. I'll give you a very recent example. I was working with someone, and she is a type 8, and she is actually very much centered in green. Yeah, and she's having lots of problems. Of course, green already is difficult for an 8. But what I realized after working with her is that her orange and red are very weak. This is very interesting here. Immediately, people stereotypically connect 8 to red and orange, especially red. Now, can you imagine an 8 that almost has no red, has a big shadow of red, and has a very weak orange? So what is she? She's very much into the we side, the communion side, the world view where we have to sacrifice for the group.
Yeah.
And of course, this is causing her lots of problems in her place of work. And it's also preventing her. I told her, no way you can move up into yellow like this. It's not about coaching you about yellow. It's about coaching you over red and orange. You already have very healthy purple and blue and green. So if we coach the red and orange, if you can own your voice, if you can talk for yourself, if you can have things for me, by doing that, you will have all these structures in a healthy enough shape in the best way and move up slowly. It's not like the spiritual development.
Yeah.
So at least be healthy in where we are by healing all these shadows that we have within us. I usually don't talk about coaching a type in a stage. It's much more complex than that. I had this very orangish 4. She was one of the people that came to me in the worst situations. She was in a very hard state. I spent actually several sessions with her just asking her to breathe, just teaching her to breathe, just to be with herself. And then after that uncovered, and I worked with her a bit, the Enneagram, and I realized she's a 4, and with the stages, I realized she's orange. I saw something that's very uncommon in our society. She's an orange with almost no blue in her at all. And in a very blue society, he was being judged all the time. Of course, this looking good, having this fashion, looking distinctive, looking special, loving fine art and loving fine food and taking care of herself. But what's hurting her is that she's being judged from a blue society, non-conforming, being a bad mother, a bad wife, a bad daughter, and when you find out she's not bad in any of these, she's just orange in all of these. She's not blue in all of these. So in this case, it's not about coaching an orange 4. It's about coaching an orange 4 in life conditions.
Yeah.
In a context. If I would talk about an orange 4 in general, help the orange 4 realize their greenishness and how to get above their orangishness and about the need to be elite. But in her case, it was not like that.
Yeah.
In her case, it was about how she can connect to the truth that she believes in a way that fits her and doesn't offend the society around her. Her challenge actually was integrating blue. 4 in blue might need to move into orange or might need to integrate red.
Yeah.
Or might need to mature spiritually in blue.
Would that be a horizontal?
That's horizontal, yeah. From the structure stages, that would be a horizontal growth.
Yeah, there's so much complexity to using these two as maps.
And this is where the beauty of these models come in. Once you start working with them, you start seeing all the nuances. You start realizing every human that comes to you in coaching is a unique case.
Yeah.
And again, this is where the integral thinking comes in. You can really have a strong understanding and acceptance without shadows of all of the stages, work with the client at whatever stages they need to work at without projecting your shadows onto them. So it requires a lot of personal work initially before you can start doing that work with others.
Definitely.
So this is where the complexity of these 3 dimensions come in. You have to have them present with you. Is this challenge coming from a structure stage or a spiritual stage or an Enneagram challenge, or where exactly coming from?
And then you customize based on all of that complexity going on. Are you ever using these maps in a transparent way with your clients, or is it always just informing you from behind the scenes?
It depends on two things. First of all, have they studied with me or not? So many of my clients study, and then they realize their personal challenges and they come to me with the personal challenges, and that becomes very easy. Then I'm totally transparent and open with them, and they are very receptive in this case. While if you have a client that hasn't studied, I always recommend not revealing the models for a long time.
Really?
Because I never try to tell a new student anything about their type or their structure or any of this, because immediately perceived as a judgment. Spend a lot of time, even though I've already picked up their type or assumed between 2 or 3 types, and I already picked up roughly where they are on the structures, but I work with them from my perspective until I take them to a safe place where there's enough rapport, enough trust, that I can let them tell me their type, after I introduce them to it, if I find it appropriate. So again, as I said, it depends. I just ask some inquisitive questions and build up an internal map of most probably it's a 1 or a 1 or a 5. Okay, it doesn't matter. So I know exactly almost where they are, or they're a gut type. I like to just corner them somewhere and work from there on, and then things reveal themselves by themselves.
That's good to know. So you're not hard, you don't have them do all the assessments so that you're crystal clear on all the stuff. Did you do that in the beginning when you started coaching, Khaled, or never?
Definitely, as you said, we've all had our mistakes. And I've done all the mistakes that you read in the book while teaching the Enneagram, projecting my shadows. I've done that. From when someone comes to you and they do something and you're like, okay, you're a type 1. I told you you're a type 1. Don't do that. So we've all gone through that. And I think every coach has to do these mistakes. The thing is that you learn how to evolve through them and learn from them and increase your capacity. And always remember, it's not about you. It's about the client. You have to get your ego out of the way. You have to just open your heart totally and be present with the client without getting dragged in with the client.
Thank you so much. This was fun. I hope that you enjoyed listening to Khaled. I really recommend his programs. They're just really enriching. My next victim is Diana Redmond, who is on the faculty at the Deep Coaching Institute. She'll be talking to me about all things Enneagram 9. Please subscribe and rate the podcast if you're inclined.